Absolutely. And I'll be honest, I mean, even through like my college years when I was getting my medical education, because, I was pre-med before I started doing behavior analysis and pursued that career, it didn't at all, like, it didn't make me woke until I finally was exposed to this specific science. It's the only science that forces you to self-analyze. Because behavior, it's something that's happening to you. It's something you can actually observe. In your biology classes, I can't observe any of the structures and everything. I need special equipment and splicing and all that stuff. I can't observe chemical reactions. I mean, I can't observe changing colors in the mixture, or some bubbling or whatever. But still, I can't quite get my hands on it, and it doesn't quite relate to my everyday life since I'm not a chemist. So behavior analysis is really what has opened my eyes. And I think that maybe your eyes have been opened through, well, first, of course, your own experiences. But I think that your science, computer science, is really how can I even put it? It's like a reflection of what we're doing as a behavior analyst with people. And you do that with kind of fake little human beings, which are computer systems. As a human being is also a
Yeah,
system. That's all. Inputs and outputs.
exactly. Yeah, input, process, output, and that's really what we are. Like you said, like it's very useful to superimpose that sort of view onto yourself to say, okay, well, I have a bunch of inputs from my environment, all the senses that I have, so the different senses of touch and feel, where I can gauge temperature. My body can do this. It has a nervous system that's helping. I have my retinas and all this. I can see. I can see on the light spectrum that we tend to know exists. I can see certain colors. Not all of them, but I can see certain ones, and I can have a sense of smell, a sense of hearing, where I can take vibration, like literal waves, and those vibrations can be processed with my cochlea and all this stuff. Your sense of taste from your tongue. So you start to say, okay, so what am I really on this thing that has a bunch of these inputs coming in all the time? So call them sensory inputs, my senses, and then the first thing that happens is they get subconsciously processed. So what I'm looking at, for instance, the image is already being flipped by the time it reaches my conscious mind. Certain gaps are being filled in. Like we have a blind spot, and your eye just I literally can't see because of where the retina is in the back of my eye. There's a blind spot.
There's no
So
input.
right. So what happens is it just fills in that gap.
Hmm.
So all this
It's
happens by the
amazing.
time it reaches me.
Yeah.
So you have that raw data come in, um, and it gets subconsciously processed. So I call that pre-processing. But then it reaches your conscious level. That's where you get to start to take control and determine how you want to process it. So what I've noticed with people is, for the most part, they never think about this ever. Maybe not even once in their entire life. And really, you need to give it a lot of thought to start to get an understanding of it. Um, but that's your whole power center, is in your consciousness. It's your ability to take all this input, which has already been filtered, pre-processed through you subconsciously, and then say, okay, so here's the information I'm looking at. Recognize like that it has been filtered, pre-processed. The spectrum of light that I can see is limited. There's much more that I'm ignorant of, so I have a very limited set of information coming in. Um, and then think, well, how do I want to process this? What a lot of people are doing is they're just impulsive. They're not taking that conscious step in this process. So it's subconsciously information comes in, and then it's just an intuitive response. It's impulsive. Oftentimes it can be emotional. It can be very short-sighted. Whatever the case may be, it's sort of like a reaction. And if you're going to take control of your consciousness, you don't want to just react. You want to be proactive. So that's going to help you long term. So
Yeah, so you're hitting
the
on
chance to get
self-control
control.
and basically teaching your body to, before you engage in some behavior, first engage in this other behavior, which is, let's think about what we're doing and having some, conversations with yourself prior to engaging in a, what other people would say, compulsory or something behavior, right?
Yeah, compulsive,
Hmm.
impulsive. Um, Oftentimes just an emotional response.
It's
And
very, very interesting to hear that. In our science, we don't recognize, I guess, consciousness again, because there's really no difference to us between the body and the mind. It's one. And your mind is just your body engaging in a verbal behavior that's happening quietly, silently in your head. And that behavior is always also evolved because it was proven useful. Instead of talking all of our thoughts out loud, I mean, how strategic would that be? It's going to really get you in trouble. Instead of thinking, wow, I should really hide from this tiger, you just like, I should really hide from the tiger, and the tiger hears you and eats you. It's just common sense why our bodies evolved to be able to engage in verbal behavior inside quietly, basically, because it helps you to survive. People who didn't think, who talked out loud without talking to themselves, without engaging in thought behavior, died because perhaps something happened in an environment that has punished that behavior. But that's the only explanation to why we even are able to engage in thoughts, or what people refer to as consciousness, ability to have thoughts.
yeah, and I mean, to me, the key word of what you just said was usefulness. And part of my what I call consciousness, which may or may not really exist as an entity or a part of me that has free will. Like I tend to sort of think of it. I like to think of it as where I have control, um, because it gives me a sense of ownership over myself, a sense of personal autonomy. It gives me a sense of responsibility, and I think that's important. Um, but usefulness, like the word I would use for that is pragmatism. That's another part of my processing, my conscious processing that I subscribe to intentionally. I try to
Mm-hmm.
think, well, okay, maybe I have this desired outcome, and maybe my first reaction is to want to do something. But let's think about it. What's going to happen if I take that action? What are the odds of getting the desired outcome? And if you're able to have self discipline and calm down, not have the quick reaction to everything, which sometimes you need the quick reaction. As you mentioned, the fight or flight response is very important. You
Mm-hmm.
need your sympathetic nervous system to kick in when there's danger, definitely. But we're in a state where we, as the apex predators on this planet, we don't really, like, you can get, if you're lucky enough, you can get to a place where you're allowed to relax. You can just go into your parasympathetic nervous system, relax, rest, digest. You can do that, and you can be okay. And then you can use that as an opportunity to think things through and to start planning ahead and making decisions, which is what you're doing. I mean, you're looking 20 years into the future already. That's not fight or flight. That is you're really just forward thinking. It's not short sighted at all.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
in my
Mhm.
but pragmatism is critical because you have to look at not just what your intended outcome is, but okay, here are the different actions that I'm aware of that I could take, and what are the odds of them leading to this outcome that I want? That would be a way of you could classify that as success. How do I increase the chance of getting the desired outcome? Um, so you can start to realize sometimes you might value honesty. It can be part of your process. You want to be honest, but maybe someone asks you how they look, and maybe they look not well in what they're wearing, or something's off, but not in a way where you think it's going to be useful to give them constructive criticism. You
Yeah,
think it will just
your goal should be to maintain adequate human relationships, not about telling them brutal truth. It's about pairing yourself with reinforcements. So the next time you get in contact with this person, they're more likely to engage with you rather than, just walk by or curse you out.
exactly.
So we can all
So
live in a better place.
right, but what happens is if you have this mindset, that kind of mindset is you're not going to go around justifying everything because you told them the truth and it's justified because it's true. No, you have to look at it more pragmatically. You have to look at it more long term. You have to look at it in terms of what the actual outcome of the action is.
The
Uh,
consequences, of course.
exactly. So
Hmm.
you can really shift your way of approaching things.
That's right. That's right. And my main goal, I guess, and my pragmatism and how I practice it is that everything that I'm about to do or the decisions that I have to make, I always ask myself, is this harming humans and other life forms? And if the answer is yes, I will do my best to abstain from the behavior or walk away from it. That's it. It's a very simple rule. Is this harming other humans and life forms?
Well, you've reached basically the same form of fundamental ethics that I've reached. As I've thought about it,
Awesome. We have that in common.
yeah, absolutely. Because the key of what you said was you mentioned does it harm, right? So we're talking now about suffering, causing damage, lowering well-being, and that is a different thing than saying does it make people happier and better and more pleasure, because those are both relevant. And yes, you want to reduce suffering and increase pleasure. But the
But
way I view ethics is
mhm.
the suffering is more important. You want to
Yes,
reduce
I was about
suffering
to say that.
more than you want
Much
to
more
increase
important.
suffering.
Yeah.
It's much more important. And I think it's super crucial that point gets brought across to people, because a lot of people aren't. That's not how they built their system of ethics. Instead, they're looking at things. Well, a lot of people don't have a sense of ethics. They just don't have any system in place. They've never really thought about it. What really matters, and how much weight do I give this versus that versus the other. Um, but I guess the main point is just, yeah, I have the exact same sense of ethics where it's more about reducing suffering, minimizing harm. That's the primary, most important thing in my view. It's just if you care about people's general well-being, not just people, any sentient being, anything that has a sense of well-being or you know does seek pleasure and tries to avoid pain, you take that into account. Um, but yeah, that to me is I try to put that in my processing layer as well. So, and when that's the way you view things, it makes sense why you have the goals that you have. You're not
And
interested
so
in
for
having a
you,
big yacht for yourself because it's not about that.
it's not.
So,
It's
and
not.
I think it's a super healthy way to kind of start to build a moral
Yeah.
code. That's just a great principle. You start with well-being, but then I would say that suffering needs to be considered more important. And like a religion or philosophy like Buddhism, that's one of the things that I take away from what they teach that I do learn from. I don't agree with everything personally. I don't think there's reincarnation or nirvana or any of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
That starts to
It's because
sound
those
magical.
explanations come from their fears of the unknown, and of course you need to tell people something that calm, and you of course you need to tell children that if mommy dies, she doesn't just like whoop gone. You need to tell them some story that comforts them, and each religion does that. And I'm not even judging them for doing stuff like that, even though it has, my God, taken a horrible turn from all
Yeah,
those
I mean,
stories. People took them a little too serious, and now guess where we are,
what
2018.
what ends up happening is in the long term you're causing a bunch of unnecessary suffering, and
Yeah,
we would like to progress beyond
but
that.
I am all for uh, any kind of direction that tells humans to stay away from harming each other and other life forms and exploiting life forms for whatever. I'm all for. I don't care at all of the background of those writings.
Yeah, but the thing that you can take away from Buddhism specifically, from Hinduism, Buddhism took the Eightfold Path, which is interesting. It's useful. You can learn from it. But Buddhism added in the Four Noble Truths, which are all about suffering, how to understand what suffering is and how to minimize it. Basically, that's the whole thing that Buddhism tries to do, which is what we're talking about. It comes from a very deep sense of ethical purpose in life and a recognition that even if I'm doing perfectly well, which I am, right? That's my reality. I wouldn't
Yeah, same here.
but I can still look out into the world and see that there's a lot of chaos, a lot of negative things happening, and I can say, okay, well, what can I do then to reduce
Yeah,
suffering, not just in me, but you care about others being just other sentient beings, which is worth clarifying because a lot of people just they only care about even people. Sometimes they only care about people close to them. So they take this
that's
sense
right.
of family, which
Hmm.
can be a good thing if you temper that value. You can say I value family. Um,
But to
that
what
can be,
extent?
yeah, it can be a great thing, but it can also
If you're harming other people by taking care of your family, we're not interested in that behavior.
yeah, and
That's
also
not a justification to harm people because you're taking care of your own people.
that's definitely one huge. There's a lot of problems with it. That's a huge one. Another problem is people become complacent because as long as their family is taken care of, they don't go above and beyond to help the next person or the next animal or plant or whatever. They limit the scope of what they care about,
Yeah.
and that's a problem when you can do so much more. There's you also get a weird sense of protectionism or isolationism where you kind of it's like you mentioned, it's like you care about them, and so much so that you're willing to harm others
You're
to
starting to
get
justify doing some messed up stuff to other families.
right. So when people say that they're one of their values is they have family values, I mean, going back to the fact that most people don't think deeply about what values are to begin with,
Hmm.
they're just sort of saying something they heard as a kid.
That's right. They're just repeating words that they don't quite understand.